So before we move on to this week's topical area or mechanism, I want to remind you that on March 7th, you need to have found a treatment manual, and that treatment manual needs to be approved by me before that date. So that may take some, back and forth. I'll also remind you that this is on a first come, first served basis. So whoever says to me, I want to do this treatment first, I'll let them do that. I would encourage you to pick something that you are not familiar with. And I would also encourage you to think about some of the sites that you've applied to for practicum as finding a manual that may be related to what you'll be doing at practicum might be more helpful. I've purposefully selected this, I believe, to be after the match day, so you will be able to know that. I would encourage you too to look at the Division 12 website. There's a lot of manuals there. There's a lot of free manuals that, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are some free manuals that you can find there. There's manuals that I might have in my office. There's manuals that I think Dr. Angeloni has a lot, and then also some at our library. So I just gave you an example here. You can click on this link of Cognitive Processing of Trauma and Evidence-Based Treatment Manual. That's an example of a particular treatment. So I just wanted to remind you of that. That's on your new course outline that I posted this week. So start looking and start talking to me about what you might want to do. Happy to help you and discuss options with you as well. So as a reminder, I think as we've been talking about since week 2, maybe week 3, anytime we change our mechanism or change our focus in terms of what we're talking about in psychotherapy, we're going to ask ourselves 4 basic questions. And you see each of them up here again. What is the focus of change? So what are we trying to change in therapy? What are the associated theories or conceptual models attached to that? What are the associated techniques that we might use to address those? And then what are the potential mechanisms and principles of change? The first 3 of those you'll be able to find and get from your reading. The 4th one I'd encourage you to think about. For me, I have to actually just think about this each week and say to myself, what are the mechanisms of change or principles of change that I can take away from the reading? Last week, I introduced a next question that we're going to be addressing as we go through the rest of the semester. I didn't do that as clearly as I want to right now, but the other thing that we're going to ask ourselves in each of these particular areas is what are the associated treatment packages and manuals? As I've been saying to you, my goal for you as you end this course is to feel confident that I could pick up just about any manual out there. I don't want to get too extreme, but just about any manual out there and say, can I do that? And my hope is that the answer to that, of course, is yes, right? So you'll be able to pick up certain manuals, for example, after this week that are focused, this week and next week actually, that are focused on interpersonal domains, right? And how do I work with interpersonal problems in psychotherapy? Those may be a session or 2 sessions or 3 sessions in a group of things. DBT runs through my mind right there. It may be an entire focus of that particular treatment package. But whatever the case, my hope is that at the end of this semester, you can pick up any of those treatment manuals and use them with confidence. So let's look at these questions in more depth as we switch our focus from cognition to interpersonal relationships. And in our readings this week and next, we're going to be looking at interpersonal relationships specifically and the skills that we need to develop and maintain interpersonal relationships. And again, just to remind you of this as we kind of move forward, remember everything's going to start with our conceptualization. So in this particular instance, we've met with our clients, we've spent 1 or 2 sessions getting to know them, and we go, you know what, I think this client needs help with their interpersonal relationships. This is when you'd use this collection of skills, right? Or maybe this is going to be the sole thing and you use a whole treatment package. But the idea with all of this is now I've identified that interpersonal skills, relationships are the key to the treatment that I want to do. And this could be in session, it could be through the session, it could be today, whatever. These are the things that we're talking about in this segment of our class. What are the associated theories and conceptual models? Not surprisingly, we see cognitive and behavioral models again. that are focused on really kind of the learning and sometimes unlearning of particular relational skills. I'm going to throw in schema-focused treatment here too. It's a little bit of a more cognitively based intervention, but it also focuses in on the relationships that we have, because one of the schemas that we might develop may be specifically related to interpersonal relationships in ourselves in interpersonal relationships. We also see specifically the interpersonal, so there's a whole theory, interpersonal theory, goes back to Harry Stack Sullivan is one of the first people that talked about this. It's kind of within the psychodynamic and analytic domain, but it really is a separate kind of model for how we form and maintain relationships. And then we have our psychodynamic. And I've included in here in parentheses the attachment and object relation schools. Many people think when they hear psychodynamic, they think of like one theory, and they tie it to Freud, and it's just not accurate. We're going to talk about this a little bit later in the semester, but psychodynamic theories are contain multiple theories within them. It's like saying cognitive behavioral is cognitive behavioral is cognitive behavioral. Well, that's not true. Cognitive behavioral theories may include cognitive theory. It may include it may include schema therapy. It may include dialectical behavior. It may include ACT. Like all of those are variations of what comes from a cognitive behavioral base. In the same way, psychodynamic is kind of a base, and it has a number of different specific approaches that follow through that and models that follow from that. Two that are related here include attachment models and object relations models. What are some of the associated techniques? This one was actually a hard one for me to kind of to answer this question. Interpretation is certainly one of them. Interpreting interpersonal patterns, conflicts, wishes, desires. Psychoeducation and role play is a big one when we come into the behavioral models in particular. And we'll talk more about that in one of the other lectures. You've heard a lot about that already. We generally start by educating our clients about what we're trying to do. We role play, we teach them, we shape it, we model it, etc. And those were tough ones. Like, are those associated techniques? I think so, but that was a tough one for me. The psychotherapy relationship is it's again an interesting one. Do I put it here as a technique? I think so, right? Because within a lot of these, we use the psychotherapy relationship as a place where people learn how to relate to others by relating to us. So we examine patterns in the psychotherapy relationship. We examine ways in which the psychotherapy relationship may be different. We may look at patterns that kind of reemerged in the relationship that have been problematic for our clients. So the psychotherapy relationship is, at the very least, if not a technique, it's a tool. It's a place where learning occurs within this particular area. And then we see these supportive expressive strategies. I might have added the cyclical, or I'm sorry, the cyclical maladaptive pattern formulation in here. I didn't. But supportive expressive strategies, they are specific strategies. Supportive is really kind of that supportive element, and expressive is that ability for me to express and understand and elaborate upon my relational patterns. We'll talk more about that in a later lecture. What are the principles and mechanisms of change? Again, I would encourage you as you're reading to try and develop these yourself before you even get to my slides. I've identified 4 here. I'm going to go through them quickly. Relational patterns exist, and that's a typo there. Relational patterns exist at the conscious and unconscious level, and these are influenced by past relationships and current contingencies in relationships, right? So I may be aware of how I interact with others. I may be unaware of how I act and am perceived by others. Those are always going to be based at least partially on my past, and they're also going to be maintained and developed via current contingencies in those relationships, what's reinforced and what's punished. The second one, relational patterns may be enacted in sessions with the therapist and provide an opportunity for new learning. This is a key one we've been talking about since really the second week of the semester, this idea that our relationship with our clients, and again, we're not just talking about the alliance here, we're talking about the relationship in general, is a place where old patterns may start to exist. They may be demonstrated, We may have the same difficulties within the relationship with our clients and relative therapists that we do in real life. And these provide an opportunity for us to unlearn some of the things that have been harmful in relationships, as well as learn new ways of relating and being in relationship to another person. The third thing here, we can learn new skills that can be practiced and mastered inside and outside of sessions. This is really modeling, rehearsal, role play, so we can use our therapeutic environment as a place to learn and develop and practice all those things. And then specific interpersonal problems may require specific interpersonal solutions and interventions. We'll see this more in the second week when we talk about this, especially with the IPT. But also, we can really generalize this to, like, I don't know how much I'll talk about it next week, but like grief, for example, like, grief is an interpersonal phenomenon. We lose someone. And here we're talking about losing someone. We're not talking about losing something. We lose another person, in that grieving process is something that we can be guided through and helped with. So that's an example for set an example for example, but it's an example of a particular interpersonal problem, issue, domain, however you want to label that, that we can enact specific therapeutic strategies in order to help our clients grieve a person or persons that they've lost in their lives. And then finally, what are some of the treatment packages that are related to this? And I'm not going to read through all of these with you. Some of them will have specific readings about. So for example, you have a specific reading on supportive expressive psychodynamic treatment this week. Others we'll talk about in passing. So DBT, for example, contains an interpersonal element. And then some of these we won't talk about at all. But again, I want to remind you that and I have 10 here. There's probably more out there. I try to introduce you to the idea that there are specific packages without necessarily providing you with a comprehensive list. But any and all of these are empirically supported treatments that we know to be effective, that have related treatment manuals with them, that you could pick up and use for any particular clients that you might be working with that have that particular disorder, or that you identify conceptually as needing interpersonally based interventions.